The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was pressurized, heavy enough to weigh down the air conditioning's low hum. My coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, leaving a bitter ring on the mahogany, while the city grid outside glowed with aggressive indifference. Across the table, Kenzie sat motionless. She looked terrifyingly immaculate for 2 a.m, a statue carved from ambition and sharp tailoring. The merger documents between us were dry legal fiction, but the charge filling the space was electric. $1 billion hostile takeover hung on a single clause, and the specific, unreadable way Kenzie was looking at me. We were suspended in a glass-walled cage on the 42nd floor, isolated from the rest of the world by acoustic paneling and the sheer altitude. The cleaning crews had ghosted through the hallways hours ago, vacating the building and leaving us alone in this vacuum of high-stakes corporate warfare. My eyes burned, a gritty, persistent reminder that I'd been awake for 19 hours. But adrenaline kept my spine stiff against the ergonomic leather. I knew better than to show weakness in front of Kenzie. In our circles, she was known for a scorched earth policy. If she couldn't win the asset, she'd burn the ground so no one else could grow anything there either. I wasn't an asset, but tonight, under the harsh, recessed lighting, I felt like one, being appraised for liquidation. She turned a page of the contract, the sound sharp like a cracking bone in the quiet room. "You're stalling on the indemnity clause," she said. Her voice hadn't frayed. It was low, smooth, a dangerous velvet texture that seemed to vibrate against the glass walls. I didn't answer immediately. I just watched her hand, the way her fingers held a silver fountain pen with a grip that was both elegant and lethal. "I'm not stalling, Kenzie. I'm protecting my client from a predatory acquisition." She looked up then, over the rim of glasses she didn't really need, and that gaze felt like a physical touch, tracing the line of my exhaustion. The air in the room was recycled and dry, tasting of ozone and stress. But every time she moved, a faint drift of her perfume cut through it. Sandalwood and something colder, like rain on pavement. It was distracting. It was meant to be. My shoulders were knots of tension under my blazer, aching with the effort of holding my posture. I wanted to stretch, to let the facade drop. But Kenzie was a predator who could smell fatigue. We were circling the same kill, but the dynamic had shifted in the last hour. It wasn't just about the acquisition price anymore. I took a sip of the cold coffee, just to have something to do with my hands. It tasted like battery acid, but the jolt helped focus my vision. Kenzie watched the movement, her eyes tracking the cup from the table to my lips and back down. It was a small thing, a microaggression of intimacy that felt entirely out of place in a merger discussion. "You look tired," she observed, not with sympathy, but with the clinical interest of a scientist watching a specimen degrade. "I look focused," I corrected, though my voice sounded raspy. There was a rhythm to this deadlock. She would push a red line across the table. I would slide it back rejected. But in the transfer, her eyes lingered on my hands. A pen tap against the table seemed to sync perfectly with the slightly elevated rate of my heartbeat. It was subtle, plausible deniability woven into professional diligence. If I called it out, I'd look unprofessional. If I ignored it, the tension coiled tighter. "You know this poison pill provision won't hold up in Delaware court," she murmured, leaning forward. The shift brought her into my personal space, just inches across the mahogany. The city was asleep. The only witnesses were the blinking lights of the server towers in the building across the street. It felt less like a boardroom and more like a cage match where the weapons were words and silence. I realized then that she wasn't trying to end this meeting. She was prolonging it. She was enjoying the friction, the resistance I was offering. Most people folded under Kenzie's pressure within the first hour. I was still here at 2 a.m., and that defiance seemed to be the only currency she actually respected. The deadlock wasn't a failure of negotiation. It was the point. She leaned back, spinning the pen between her fingers, her expression shifting from adversarial to something far more complex. The isolation of the room amplified everything: the rustle of paper, the hum of the HVAC, the sudden, sharp awareness of how close we actually were. It was infuriating. It was also, against my better judgment and basic survival instincts, incredibly attractive. Watching Kenzie dismantle a complex liability clause was like watching a master watchmaker disassemble a time bomb. Precise, calm, and utterly confident that nothing would explode unless she wanted it to. She wasn't just reading the contract. She was dissecting it, her silver pen hovering over the pages like a scalpel before slashing through 3 paragraphs of my carefully constructed defense. "This poison pill provision," she said, tapping the section where I'd buried a trigger that would dilute the stock if they bought more than 15%. It was a standard defense mechanism, a way to make the company too expensive to swallow. "It's clumsy. You're trying to flood the market with cheap shares to dilute our holding, but you've left a loophole in the definition of an acquiring person." "It's not a loophole, Kenzie. It's a carve-out for institutional investors." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, refusing to cede the ground. "And it's standard Delaware corporate law. You know that." "I know it's a desperate attempt to entrench a board that's been underperforming for 3 quarters, she countered, her voice dropping an octave, slipping under my guard. She circled a phrase with aggressive precision. "I can litigate this definition for 6 months. By the time a judge rules, your stock price will be in the basement, and my client will buy the scraps for pennies. Is that your strategy? Scorched earth?" "I thought scorched earth was your signature move," I shot back, the retort coming too quickly. She looked up, and for the first time in 4 hours, the corner of her mouth quirked upward. It wasn't a smile. Kenzie didn't smile during negotiations. But it was a break in the armor. "I prefer surgical strikes," she murmured. "Cleaner. Less collateral damage." The intellectual sparring was beginning to feel less like warfare and more like a dance, a high-stakes tango where the steps were defined by fiduciary duties and SEC regulations. I found myself tracking the movement of her eyes as she scanned the golden parachute section, the clause guaranteeing my executives massive payouts if they were fired. I knew she would hate it. I was counting on it. $50 million for the CEO if we terminate him without cause? She read the number aloud, letting the absurdity of the figure hang in the recycled air. "He ran the operating margin into the ground, and you want to give him a lottery win for it?" "It's retention," I argued, though my heart wasn't in the defense of the CEO, only in the defense of the argument itself. "He has a contract. He has a ransom note," she corrected. She leaned across the table to strike the line out, and the movement brought her into my atmosphere. The sudden proximity was a physical shock. Her blazer sleeve brushed against my forearm, the fabric cool, but the heat beneath it radiating instantly. The heat radiating from her was distracting, a physical weight in the sterile room. She stayed there, hovering over the document, her face inches from mine as she slashed through the payout figure. My breath hitched, a traitorous, shallow sound that I hoped was lost in the hum of the building. I looked at her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the dark lashes lowering as she focused on the paper. She wasn't just negotiating a deal. She was testing me. She was throwing punches to see if I would flinch or counter. "You don't actually believe he deserves that money," she said softly, not looking up, her pen pausing on the page. "My personal belief is irrelevant. My duty is to the client." "Your duty is to get the best deal," she said, finally turning her head. We were so close, I could see the flecks of gold in her iris, the dilation of her pupils. "And you know, I'm the best deal you're going to get." The double entendre hung there, heavy and undeniable. The air thickened, charged with something that had nothing to do with stock options. She wasn't angry. She was exhilarated. Her eyes were bright, lit from within by the challenge. She was enjoying this, the resistance, the late hour, the way I refused to fold. It was a game to her, and for the first time, I realized I didn't want the game to end. I wanted to see what other defenses she could break down. 3 a.m. arrived, not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating slide into delirium. The adrenaline that had sustained our sparring match for the last 6 hours finally evaporated, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to buzz louder, a headache forming behind my eyes that throbbed in perfect sync with the blinking cursor on the laptop screen. We had been arguing over a non-compete clause for 40 minutes, but the words were losing their meaning, turning into abstract shapes on the page. The silence between our arguments grew longer, heavier, no longer filled with strategy, but with the sheer physical weight of endurance. Kenzie sighed, a sound that cracked the professional veneer she had worn like armor all night. She reached up and slid her glasses off, folding them onto the table with a soft click. Without the black frames, her face changed instantly. The severity softened, the terrifying precision of her gaze blurring into something human. She looked younger, less like a corporate executioner, and more like a woman who was just as exhausted as I was. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, eyes closed for a moment, and that brief second of unguardedness felt more intimate than anything we'd said all night. It was a permission slip. I mirrored the surrender. I pushed my chair back slightly, ensuring the heavy mahogany table hid me from the waist down, and slipped my heels off. The cool carpet against my aching arches was a relief so profound, I almost groaned aloud. I let my head drop back against the leather headrest, staring up at the acoustic tiles, letting the facade slip just enough to breathe. "We're going in circles, Kenzie," I whispered to the ceiling, my voice raspy. "We're not in circles," she corrected, though her voice had lost its sharp, performative edge. It was lower now, textured with fatigue. "We're in a spiral. Downward." I looked back at her. She was watching me again, but the predatory glint was gone, replaced by a heavy-lidded curiosity that made my skin prickle. She picked up her water glass, swirling the last few drops, the movement hypnotic. "Tell me something," she said. And the tone wasn't a demand anymore. It was a request, conspiratorial and quiet. "Do you actually care about the indemnity cap? Or are you just enjoying watching me work for it?" "I care about my client not getting sued into oblivion. Your client is a conglomerate that owns 3 senators and a small island nation. They'll be fine." A small, tired smile played on her lips. A genuine one this time. "Admit it. You just like being the only person in the room who can tell me no." "Maybe I just like seeing you frustrated," I admitted, the filter between my brain and my mouth dissolving in the late hour. "Frustrated isn't the word I'd use," she murmured. She stood up then, not to leave, but to stretch, walking to the blackened window where the city reflected back at us like a distant galaxy. She leaned against the glass, arms crossed, the posture opening the line of her throat. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "Better than I expected. I thought you'd fold on the valuation by midnight." "I don't fold. I see that." Her voice dropped an octave, becoming a low hum that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. "It's rare. Most people are terrified of me by this point. You just dig your heels in. It's incredibly compelling." The word compelling hung in the air, heavy and loaded. It didn't feel like a professional assessment. It felt like a caress. The distance between us, me in the chair, her by the window, suddenly felt charged, a magnetic field pulling taut. The room felt smaller, the vast conference table that had been a battlefield, now just furniture, in a space that felt too private for a negotiation. The hum of the HVAC seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of our breathing. "Why are we still here, Kenzie?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could check it. "Because neither of us knows how to lose," she answered, pushing off the window and walking slowly back toward me. She stopped at the edge of the table, looking down with an intensity that burned. "And because I don't think either of us wants to leave." "Paragraph 14, she whispered, though her finger wasn't pointing at the text anymore. It was tracing the grain of the wood, a slow, deliberate line that drew my eye down to her hands. "The exclusivity period. I want it extended by 30 days. "You're greedy, Kenzie." "I'm thorough." I moved. I didn't make a conscious decision to cross the invisible demilitarized zone we had maintained for 6 hours. My body simply decided that the argument was over. I walked around the corner of the massive table, my stocking feet silent on the plush carpet, closing the distance until I was standing right beside her. The shift in proximity changed the air pressure in the room. Up close, the perfection of her suit revealed tiny human details. A faint crease in her collar, the rapid pulse jumping in the hollow of her throat. She didn't retreat. She tilted her head back, looking up at me with an expression that was half challenge, half surrender. "You can't have the extension," I said, my voice dropping to a register I usually reserved for secrets. "My client walks if you push the date." "Then offer me something else," she murmured. Her gaze dropped to my lips, heavy and expectant. "Give me a reason to sign." The tension that had been coiling in my chest since 8 o'clock finally snapped. It wasn't a decision, it was a physical necessity, like breathing after holding your breath underwater. I reached out, my hand fisting in the lapel of her blazer, and pulled her up. She rose to meet me, the movement fluid and eager, and then we collided. It wasn't tentative. There was no testing of waters. Her mouth found mine with a shocking, bruising certainty. It was the kind of kiss that tasted of suppressed adrenaline and months of rivalry, a release of energy that felt almost violent in its intensity. She tasted of black coffee and something sharp, like ozone. I gasped against her lips, and she took advantage of the opening, deepening the contact with a groan that vibrated through my own chest. It was a hostile takeover in the truest sense. She was claiming territory, demanding capitulation. But I wasn't the kind of woman who yielded, and neither was she. That was the spark. I kissed her back with equal force, my hands sliding up to tangle in the hair at the nape of her neck, ruining the perfect bun she'd worn like a crown all day. I felt the pins scatter, hitting the mahogany table with tiny, metallic clicks. She gripped my waist, her fingers digging into my sides, grounding me, pulling me flush against her. The momentum carried us backward. I felt the hard edge of the conference table bite into my hip. And then she pressed me down against it. A stack of red-lined contracts, the outcome of a billion-dollar negotiation, slid out from under my hand. They cascaded off the edge, fluttering to the floor in a chaotic, white rain. But neither of us looked. The sound of paper hitting the floor was drowned out by the sound of our breathing, ragged and harsh in the quiet room. She pulled back for a fraction of a second, just enough to breathe, her eyes blown wide and dark. She looked wrecked, her lipstick smudged, her chest heaving, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice rough. "I knew you tasted like trouble." "Shut up, Kenzie," I breathed and pulled her back down. This time, the kiss was slower, deeper. It was a sultry, unflinching exploration. Her hands roamed over the back of my blazer, learning the shape of my spine, while my thumbs traced the sharp line of her jaw. The memory of this room was being rewritten from a place of business to a place of sensation. We were two professionals at the top of our game, reducing ourselves to touch and taste. Her hand slid lower, gripping my thigh, hiking my skirt up just an inch. And the sensation was electric, grounding, and terrifying. But as my head fell back, staring up at the ceiling, my eyes caught the reflection in the glass wall opposite us, the city grid, the lights, and above the door, the unblinking red eye of the security camera. Ice water flooded my veins. I stiffened, my hand clamping over her wrist. "Kenzie," I gasped, breaking the seal of our mouths. "Kenzie, stop!" She froze instantly, her instincts sharp. She didn't pull away, but she went still, her forehead resting against mine. "What?" "The glass," I whispered, breathless, gesturing vaguely to the transparent walls that surrounded us. "The cameras. Security does rounds at 3:15. She turned her head, following my gaze to the hallway. We were on display, a fishbowl in the sky. Anyone, a janitor, a guard, a lingering associate, could walk by and see the lead litigator of the opposing firm pressed between my thighs against the boardroom table. The reality of it crashed into the haze of lust. If this got out, the merger wouldn't just be dead. Our careers would be collateral damage. She exhaled a shaky breath, the warm air hitting my neck, and slowly, reluctantly, stepped back. The loss of her warmth was immediate physical pain. She looked at the scattered papers on the floor, then back at me, her eyes still burning with that dark, unrefined hunger. The professional mask was gone, shattered on the floor with the contracts. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice steadying but still low, intimate. "No," I agreed, smoothing my skirt with trembling hands. "We can't." "My car is downstairs," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the next clause in the new agreement we were writing. The elevator ride down to the garage was a study in desperate damage control. We stood on opposite sides of the car, watching the floor numbers plummet in red LEDs, frantically smoothing skirts and pinning hair back into a semblance of professional order. But the reflection in the polished steel doors didn't lie. My lips were swollen, the lipstick completely gone, and Kenzie's silk blouse was slightly askew at the collar. We looked like exactly what we were. Two people who had just broken every rule in the employee handbook and were fleeing the scene of the crime. When the doors opened to the parking garage, the cold, subterranean air hit us like a physical slap, sobering but not stopping the momentum. The security guard at the booth offered a tired wave, completely unaware that the two women exiting the building were about to merge their trajectories entirely. I left my car sitting in its reserved spot. It was a risk, a calculated insanity. But when Kenzie unlocked her sleek charcoal sedan, I slid into the passenger seat without a second thought. The interior smelled of her, leather, dark roast coffee, and that maddening sandalwood scent, now concentrated in the small, hermetically sealed space. "My apartment is being renovated," she lied smoothly as she keyed the ignition, the engine purring to life with a low, expensive growl. She didn't look at me, but her grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. "And yours is in the city center. Too much noise, too many doormen." "Where are we going, Kenzie?" I asked, though the GPS on the dashboard was already mapping a route north, away from the grid and the faltering negotiations. "I have a place," she said, her voice tight, controlled. "A cabin on the lake. It's an hour out. It's quiet. We can review the final terms there, properly." The excuse was so thin, it was transparent. We weren't going to a cabin at 3:30 in the morning to review indemnity clauses. We were going because the boardroom had become a cage, and the city felt like a panopticon. We needed to be somewhere where the only eyes watching were our own. I didn't call her out on it. I just nodded, watching the city skyline retreat in the side mirror, a cluster of glowing, jagged teeth that slowly faded into the darkness of the highway. The drive was surreal. Outside, the weather turned, a sudden spring storm lashing against the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of gray and black. Inside, the climate control hummed a steady, warm breath, creating a cocoon of artificial safety. The quiet between us was thick with anticipation, a pressurized container waiting to burst. Kenzie drove focused, aggressive but controlled, her hands shifting gears with a competence that made my stomach flip. The green glow of the dashboard lights cast shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp architecture of her cheekbones and the tension in her jaw. I felt a strange sense of unreality. An hour ago, I was fighting for a poison pill defense. Now, I was watching the rain streak the glass, acutely aware of the heat radiating from the vents and the woman beside me. In the office, wrapped in the context of the deal, I was the lead counsel. Here, in the dark, moving 60 miles an hour through the woods, I was just a body, reacting to her gravity. There were no witnesses here, no clerks to interrupt, no cameras to record, just the hum of the tires on wet asphalt and the knowledge that whatever happened at the end of this road wasn't going to be subject to judicial review. It was terrifying. It was the most exhilarating feeling of my life. I looked at her hands on the wheel again. No wedding ring, no jewelry other than a sleek watch. Just capable, strong hands that had pinned me to a mahogany table less than an hour ago. She sensed my gaze and glanced over, her eyes dark and unreadable in the shadows. "You're staring," she murmured, returning her eyes to the slick road. "I'm evaluating the driver's competence," I countered softly, falling back into our rhythm. "Don't worry," she said, her voice dropping that dangerous octave again. "I know exactly where I'm taking you." The gravel driveway was a river of mud that crunched wetly under the tires, signaling the end of the world as we knew it. Or, at least, the end of the jurisdiction where billable hours governed our heart rates. The headlights cut through the deluge, illuminating a structure that was the antithesis of the steel skyscraper we had just fled. It was all dark timber and stone, a brooding shadow against the lake that looked less like a vacation home and more like a fortress designed to keep the rest of humanity out. Kenzie killed the engine, and the sudden absence of the mechanical hum left us with only the drumming of rain on the roof. "Run," she said, the command lacking her usual professional detachment. We scrambled out of the car, heels sinking into the wet earth, the cold rain soaking through my blazer in the 3 seconds it took to reach the porch. She fumbled with the keys, a rare moment of clumsiness that made my chest ache. And then the heavy oak door swung open. We spilled inside, breathless and dripping. The air in the cabin was stagnant and cold, smelling of cedar, wood smoke, and disuse. It was a sensory shock after the sterile, recycled ozone of the boardroom. Kenzie didn't turn on the overhead lights. Instead, she moved through the shadows with memory as her guide, flipping a switch that bathed the room in the warm amber glow of floor lamps. She went straight to the massive stone hearth that dominated the living room. "You're freezing," she observed without looking at me, her hands busy stacking kindling with the same efficiency she used to stack evidence.
"I'm fine," I lied, though my teeth were on the verge of chattering. I wrapped my arms around myself, wandering deeper into the room. It was luxurious but sparse. Leather furniture, heavy wool throws, walls lined with books that looked read rather than displayed. It felt private, intimate. A match flared, the smell of sulfur sharp and brief. And then, the fire caught. The sudden warmth began to battle the chill in the room. Kenzie stood up and finally turned to face me. The transformation was subtle, but devastating. She shrugged off her structured blazer, tossing it carelessly onto a leather armchair. The silk blouse she wore underneath was softer, less armored, revealing the slope of her shoulders and the fact that she was just a person, not an institution. She reached up and pulled the remaining pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall loose around her face. "Wine," she stated, moving toward a small kitchenette in the corner.
I think we've earned something better than lukewarm boardroom coffee.
Is this part of the strategy? I asked, leaning against the back of the sofa, watching her uncork a bottle of Cabernet.
Get opposing counsel drunk and pliable?
If I wanted you pliable, I would have agreed to your indemnity clause, she shot back. But there was no bite in it. She walked back toward me, holding 2 glasses by the stems. She handed me one, her fingers brushing mine. A deliberate, lingering contact that sent a fresh wave of heat through me.
I thought you specialized in hostile takeovers, I murmured, taking a sip. The wine was heavy, oaky, and expensive. It tasted like the opposite of stress. Kenzie sank onto the rug in front of the fire, ignoring the furniture entirely, and patted the space beside her. It was a challenge. A truce. I do, she said, looking up at me through her lashes, the flames reflecting in her eyes. But I'm finding that I'm increasingly interested in a different kind of arrangement. Depending on the terms, of course.
I kicked off my heels for the 2nd time that night and sat down next to her. The storm outside battered the windows, a chaotic, thrashing thing. But in here, the world had narrowed down to the crackle of burning pine and the scent of cedar. We were miles from the city, removed from the deadlines and the shareholders. The silence that stretched between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, with the magnetic pull that had been dragging us together all night. The terms might be steep, I warned softly, swirling the wine. I have deep pockets, she replied, her voice dropping to that sultry, low register that made my toes curl. And I'm very good at negotiation. We sat there as the storm raged, 2 rivals in a truce that felt dangerously like the start of something permanent. The lead litigator was gone. In her place was just Kenzie, watching me over the rim of her glass with a hunger that she was no longer trying to hide behind a contract. The wine did what hours of circular arguments couldn't. It dissolved the last layer of professional tension, leaving us exposed in the firelight. The quiet that settled between us wasn't waiting for a rebuttal or a counteroffer. It was heavy, comfortable, and strange. My shoulder pressed against hers. We were sitting on the plush rug, the expensive leather sofa behind us serving as a backrest, our legs stretched out toward the warmth. It was a breach of protocol, so severe it felt like a hallucination.
Why didn't you take the first offer? Kenzie asked softly. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on the fire, her profile softened by the amber light. The valuation was fair. You could have closed this 3 weeks ago and saved us both the sleep deprivation.
It was a lowball, and you know it, I replied, the fight draining out of my voice, leaving only the truth. And if I had taken it, you would have lost respect for me. You didn't want the company. You wanted the fight. She turned her head then, a slow, deliberate movement. Her eyes were dark, stripped of the calculated coldness she wore in the boardroom. You're right, she admitted, the confession hanging in the air like smoke. I've spent 10 years walking into rooms where men twice my age tremble before I even open my briefcase. It's boring. But you just looked at me over that table like I was an interesting puzzle you hadn't solved yet. It was infuriating. I was terrified, I countered, taking a sip of the wine to hide the sudden dryness in my throat. You have a reputation for leaving nothing standing.
I don't scorch the earth for fun, she murmured, shifting slightly so her knee brushed mine. The contact was electric, a grounding wire for the nervous energy still humming under my skin. I do it because if I show a single crack, they'll tear me apart. You know how this world works. It doesn't forgive softness.
I see softness now, I whispered. It was a risk, a sultry compliment that crossed the line from professional observation to personal claim. Kenzie reached out, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw, her touch light but possessive. That's because you're the only one I've let inside the perimeter, she said, her voice dropping to a rough whisper. Your resilience is barely legal.
the way you held that silence tonight, it was the most attractive thing I've seen in a fiscal quarter. The energy that had fueled us finally crashed, leaving a heavy, narcotic exhaustion in its wake. The storm outside had settled into a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof. "We should sleep," I said, though I made no move to get up. The idea of moving to a guest room, of putting walls between us again, felt impossible. "We should," Kenzie agreed. She took the glass from my hand and set it on the floor beside hers. Then, without a word of negotiation, she pulled a heavy wool throw from the sofa down onto the rug. She didn't suggest the bedroom. She didn't ask for permission. She simply lay back against the cushions and pulled me down with her. It wasn't a seduction. We were too wrecked for that. It was a collapse. I curled into her, my back to her chest, fitting against her body as if we had been designed for this specific architecture. Her arm came around my waist, heavy and solid, pulling me flush against her. The heat of her body seeped through my blouse, chasing away the last of the chill from the rain. "Just for a few hours," she mumbled into my hair, her breathing already slowing, deepening. "The merger can wait." "Hostile takeover," I corrected sleepily, my eyelids heavy. "Friendly acquisition," she countered, her voice fading. I closed my eyes, surrounded by the scent of cedar, sandalwood, and the terrifying comfort of her arms. There were no cameras here, no red lines, no glass walls, just the steady, rhythmic thud of the lead litigator's heart beating against my spine. A sound that felt dangerously like a promise I wasn't ready to sign, but couldn't bring myself to reject. Sunlight sliced through the uncurtained windows like a subpoena, demanding immediate attention. It wasn't the soft, romantic glow of a movie morning. It was high-contrast, unforgiving reality that illuminated every dust mote dancing in the cold air. My body protested the moment I tried to move. Sleeping on a Persian rug in a tailored suit was a tactical error my chiropractor would never forgive. My blazer was twisted uncomfortably around my waist. My pencil skirt was hiked up to a scandalous degree, and my mouth tasted like stale wine and dry anxiety. But then I felt the solid, rhythmic weight against my side, and the physical regret evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, hollow thud in my chest. Kenzie. She was still asleep. The terrifying lead litigator, the woman who could silence a boardroom with a single arched eyebrow, was currently using my arm as a pillow. In the harsh light of day, the reality of our situation hit me harder than the headache. This wasn't just messy, it was a career-ending catastrophe waiting to be leaked. We were rivals. We were supposedly in the middle of a hostile negotiation. And yet, here we were, tangled together like we'd been doing this for years, stripped of our professional defenses, even if we were still wearing the uniforms. I propped myself up on one elbow, ignoring the sharp protest of my stiff neck, and just looked at her. Without the black-framed glasses, without the sharp, weaponized alertness that defined her waking hours, she looked shockingly, devastatingly young. The tension that permanently etched lines of concentration around her mouth was gone, smoothed out by deep sleep. Her dark hair, usually a marvel of structural engineering, was a chaotic halo spread across the wool rug, wild and untouched. It felt illicit to see her like this, unguarded, soft, human. It was a trade secret I wasn't authorized to know. A vulnerability that gave me leverage I didn't want to use. I felt a surge of adrenaline-spiked panic, a frantic need to find my shoes, check my phone for missed calls from the partners, and reconstruct the professional walls we had so recklessly demolished last night. But beneath the panic was a deep, treacherous contentment. The silence wasn't lonely. The cold air didn't matter because she was a furnace of warmth against me. Then, the rhythm of her breathing changed. It hitched, then deepened. Her eyelids fluttered, and I froze, caught in the act of unauthorized surveillance. Kenzie didn't wake up slowly. There was no groggy confusion, no period of disorientation. One moment she was asleep, and the next, those gray eyes were open, focusing instantly on my face. I braced myself for the recoil. I expected the sudden return of the professional mask, the awkward apology, the scramble for distance. It didn't happen. She just looked at me, her gaze steady and unflinching. A slow, lazy smile spread across her face, one that reached her eyes and stayed there. It was the most dangerous thing she had done yet. "Stop thinking so loud," she rasped, her voice rough with sleep, dropping to a register that scraped pleasantly against my nerves. "I can hear your brain drafting a liability waiver from here." "We fell asleep," I stated, the obviousness of it sounding stupid in the quiet cabin. "On the floor." "We did," she agreed. She reached up, her hand warm and heavy, and cupped my cheek. Her thumb brushed over my cheekbone, not testing, but claiming. "And for the record, you snore when you're stressed." "I do not." "You do. It's adorable." She shifted, wincing slightly as the hardwood floor made its presence known, but she didn't let go of me. "And before you start panicking about the optics or the merger or the fact that we look like a laundry pile, don't. Kenzie, we have a deal to close. We have clients." "The deal will close," she said, her eyes darkening slightly, the intensity returning not as aggression, but as focus. "But right now, I'm not negotiating." She pulled me down a fraction of an inch, just enough to blur my vision with proximity. "We woke up exposed, counselor. No suits, no armor, no bullshit. Don't try to put the mask back on yet. It doesn't fit anymore." She was right. The sunlight revealed everything. The wrinkles in our clothes, the smudge of mascara under my eye, the undeniable reality of her body pressed against mine. We were a mess. We were a disaster. And as I leaned into her touch, accepting the rough friction of her thumb against my skin, I knew I wouldn't trade this exposure for all the billable hours in the world. The truce ended the moment the tires hit the pavement. Or at least, the public version of it did. We had to go back. The markets opened in 3 hours, and there were billions of dollars tethered to the decisions we had made in the dark. But as we packed up, Kenzie rinsing the wine glasses, me smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt with a damp towel, the air wasn't heavy with dread. It was vibrating with a new, secret frequency. We weren't returning to the arena as gladiators trying to kill each other anymore. We were returning as partners who had rigged the game. The drive back was a masterclass in compartmentalization. The storm had washed the sky clean, leaving a bruised purple dawn over the highway. Inside the car, the silence was no longer a weapon to be wielded. It was a workspace. "I'll drop the lawsuit on the poison pill," Kenzie said, her eyes fixed on the road, her voice slipping back into that cool, professional cadence that usually made my blood boil. "But I want the board seats. 3 of them." "2, I countered, watching her profile against the blurring trees. "And a 2-year lockup on the founder's shares. You can't gut the leadership team until the transition is stable." "Done," she agreed instantly. She didn't look at me, but her hand drifted off the gear shift to squeeze my knee, a jolt of heat that completely undermined the cold, corporate logic of her words. "See? We're efficient when we're not trying to destroy each other." We spent the next 40 minutes rewriting the future of 2 conglomerates. It was the most honest negotiation of my life, because the posturing was gone. We mapped out the press release, the joint statement, the spin we would feed the trade journals. We were crafting a narrative for the world to consume, the hard-fought compromise, the meeting of minds. But beneath the dry legalese, we were drafting a different contract entirely, one with unwritten clauses about midnight drives and the way her thumb brushed my skin. The rivalry was still there. She was still arrogant, and I was still stubborn, but the animosity had been replaced by a secret alliance. We were two predators who had decided to hunt together. As the city skyline rose out of the mist, the lines blurred. Kenzie hadn't just acquired a company. She had rewritten the rules of engagement. And I hadn't just defended a client. I had negotiated my way into her orbit. We were merging lives in a way that couldn't be undone by a court order. The boundaries I had drawn had been breached, not by force, but by a quiet, relentless competence that I found impossible to resist. She pulled the car over 2 blocks from the tower, idling in the shadow of a rival bank. The engine hummed, a low vibration that traveled through the floorboards. "You go in through the east lobby," she instructed, turning to face me. The morning light caught the sharp angle of her jaw, the intelligence in those gray eyes. "I'll take the main entrance 10 minutes later. We look exhausted. We look like we've been at each other's throats all night." "We have been," I smirked, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Different context," she corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She leaned across the console. It wasn't the desperate, crashing collision of the boardroom. It was a lingering, proprietary kiss that promised everything the day wouldn't allow. "Go close the deal, counselor. I'll see you in the boardroom." "And after?" I asked, my hand lingering on the door handle. "After," she promised, her voice dropping to that sultry whisper. "We negotiate the severance package for your solitude. I intend to be very thorough." I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold morning air hitting my face, but I felt invincible. I walked toward the glass tower not as a tired lawyer dreading a fight, but as a woman carrying a secret that burned brighter than the city grid. We were entering uncharted territory, a merger of rivals, a collision of hearts. And for the first time, I wasn't looking for an exit strategy. I was just waiting for the next meeting. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and I saw Kenzie across the room. Immaculate again, terrifying again. She gave me a curt nod, the perfect picture of corporate hostility. But I saw the spark in her eyes that only I knew how to ignite. We had turned a war into a partnership, and the most dangerous negotiation was just beginning. Subscribe to see how this merger plays out in the next chapter.